Hi, my name is Cherno and I'm an alcoholic. Wait, that's alright. My name is Cherno and I'm making a game engine. So I was trying to decide between which of two major projects to embark on next for Hazel. Multiplayer or rewriting the renderer again. Now, since we already kind of have a renderer, which I actually rewrote not that long ago, even though I'd like to rewrite it again and I have a huge plan for it, I thought, why not do something new? Something entirely new. So here we are, multiplayer in Hazel. Somewhat coincidentally, the game that I'm currently working on, remaking my first game but in 3D in Hazel, I think could actually work pretty well in a multiplayer format. Kind of like an MMO. Also, I've never done this before, this whole multiplayer thing, so this is gonna be fun, because I have no idea what I'm doing. So let's see, do we have everything we need? Game engine? Check. Game to drive the development of multiplayer? Check. Server. We need a server. This is a little weird, but this fake phone is ringing. You know what, let me just, one sec. Hello? Hostinger. You would not believe what we were just talking about. So I decided to live stream like this entire project. So I've got a lot of footage, a lot of real development footage. And I don't know, I thought it might be cool to have this video actually like show the real development process of the project rather than it just being like a retrospective, like my remaking my first game in 3D video. I don't know what's better. I don't know what you guys like more. Do you want to see more like real development? What it was actually like, how it really came together? Or is like a retrospective of me telling the story more entertaining? I don't know, let me know. Anyway, the full streams are gonna be up on Twitch for, I think 60 days is how long Twitch keeps them up there for, and then I'm gonna be putting them up on Patreon. So if you're interested in the full development process, and it's been more than 60 days and you can't find them on Twitch, then patreon.com/thecherno, thank you very much. Basically what I managed to achieve this month in this video is we kind of talked about the design a lot. We managed to introduce this thing called entity domains into Hazel as well, and server-side scripting so that we could write our games in C#, the server-side component in C# for our games. I thought that would be a really good starting point and a really kind of flexible system so that, because servers have to be quite different depending on the game, of course. So locking developers into some kind of standard for networking and multiplayer, like that's even possible, seems kind of difficult to do, especially because I've never really done this before, and therefore I don't know what an ideal setup for like multiplayer for a game looks like, even for a game like Genesis. So I just thought it would be more flexible to provide something scriptable instead of having the engine, for example, automatically synchronize entities across like the client and the server in some sort of way, like whatever that means. And it all began with Walnut, believe it or not. This was Walnut Chat. This is a little chat client that I made in Walnut, which if you guys don't know is like my little application framework based on I'mGUI. This is what Walnut Chat looks like. Walnut has this like module that I made called Walnut Networking. And Walnut Networking is, I cleverly based this on Game Networking Sockets by Valve, which is, like, yes, it's an implementation of sockets, I guess, in C++, but it's also designed like for video games, obviously, and it's a really good, easy to use API, which even supports Steam if you want to support Steam. So even though it's made by Valve, it doesn't enforce Steam or anything like that. You can use it, obviously. Obviously, Walnut Chat is outside of Steam. This task, of adding multiplayer to Hazel or whatever, the networking side of things is basically done. We might need to extend this a bit, of course, but like, we have the ability to network. How on earth do we integrate this with the game engine? Like, what does that even mean? How do we make Hazel now into an engine that suddenly can handle multiplayer? Instead of making this at like that low level of like, okay, this is at the base of Hazel, we've got all of this, like every entity you create in Hazel is automatically like networked to some degree. Maybe it's not, maybe it's client only if you're making a single player game, maybe it's like it's shared with the server if you're not. Like, instead of making it like that, we could also just be like, okay, well, networking is a concept that purely exists at the game level. And what that would mean effectively is that all of this stuff that we're talking about, this whole server client API, being able to send messages across the network, like that still exists in C++ Hazel. It has to, because, it'll be kind of called from C#. But if you want to make a game that uses that, you yourself have to manage that entirely in C#, right? The engine will still provide you with an API to do all of that. Oh yeah, and the good thing I didn't mention about obviously Walnut and Walnut networking is it obviously works on Linux because we made Walnut Chat and the server ran on Linux. So we'll just have a folder called like Hazelnet. This is kind of where we can just copy and paste everything from Walnut networking. This is Walnut Chat server basically, but I'm just like modding it to work with Hazel. If we hit play, yeah, ID, I guess connection type or whatever, IP address and the port on the client that we're connecting through. This is like the way that I made this for some reason in the beginning, which was just last stream, not that long ago, was I was kind of thinking that like, oh yeah, we'll just have like a standalone server, because I was kind of thinking about, you know, how we're going to set this up with just Walnut networking and like it'll just be a Hazel server and blah, 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 everything's great. But then I very quickly realized over the weekend that like, but wait a minute, to actually make a game that uses Hazel and then have it like, you know, have a server that's like a Hazel server to run that game, like you clearly need Hazel. Like, because, you know, doing, for example, you know, a physics simulation in the scene is usually something the server would do, like, as the authority, I mean. It needs to be able to do a physics simulation so that it can make sure that like players are not walking through walls or whatever, right? That means that like we need to be able to basically play the game on the server. You're playing the game on the client, right? And the client is just playing the game normally, like as in the full game is on the client, right? So you're walking around, you're doing your physics simulations, you're doing everything like normal, but then you know, we decided on kind of doing 30 hertz for now. So every like 30 times per second, you're basically being like, oh, by the way, server, I am over here. You know, I'm moving this way. If you need to know, here's my position, blah, blah, blah. Like, here's my position, here's my speed, you could say, right? And then the server is going to be like, oh, cool, Cherno, you're moving around the map. So let me just take in your position and your like velocity or whatever. And I'm going to see, you know, where you are in the world and where you're trying to move to. Oh, look. You're colliding with this thing. That's what I better hear from next when I hear from you. And then you might have written some cool no-clip cheat thing where you're like, looks like I'm here now. And the server's like, oh, well, I actually expected you to be here, so let me try and move where you've said you can move to. Oh, wait, we don't agree. So guess what? I'm gonna tell you that you're gonna move your ass back here because you're actually supposed to be colliding with the wall, right? So that's why it's important to do that. But you still want to do the whole game on the client side, because if you don't, then that means the server has to tell you everything. And obviously, you know, we're looking at like a round trip, which depends what your ping is, but like it could be like 100 milliseconds there and back. It could be 200, it could be 50, but that's still annoying and that's still not as reactive as you'd like it to be. So the idea is you kind of like, you want it to feel local, so you still do everything locally, but then you just have the server kind of validating everything you're doing, you know, as well as reporting other stuff that's happening on the server, like other players moving. The client does so much more stuff than the server ever needs to do. Like UI, visual effects like particles, animation, you know, animation bones, like rendering, obviously, like all of that stuff, the server doesn't care about any of it. So my strategy here isn't going to be to make Hazel headless and then just have it run with no rendering and blah, blah, and just act as the server. My idea is kind of to write two different games. The client is specifically running the client version of the game, and then the server is running the server version of the game, which does something completely different. Is the server C++ or is it C#? And the thing is, like, since the game is written in C#, if we make the server in C#, then anything the game needs to do, that the game can possibly do, we can do. So like, if I want to call add force, that's the function that I'm doing on the client, I can do that exact same thing on the server. All right, let's zoom out a little bit and think about how this is actually going to work, you know, when it's done, because I think that's always important to think about. The server part is going to need to be deployed on an actual physical server, which is why I've been thinking about this whole headless build of Hazel, because we're going to need that to actually deploy this and have it behave like a real server. I've made a video talking about what headless means in general, and I used Walnut Chat, which is a little chat program I made, as an example. I'll have that video linked up there if you're interested more in what headless means. And so because I think it's important when you're working on a project to not just go through it linearly, just from like start to finish, building up and up and up, and then you get to the end and you realize, oh wait, this isn't actually gonna work, because I don't like doing that, and instead I like basically I guess starting from the start, but then also starting from the end, and then kind of working backwards sometimes to converge on the actual final result at the end. Let's now take a moment to discuss the server side of things. Now, Hostinger have been nice enough to provide us with a server as well as sponsor this entire multiplayer project. Huge thanks to them. So let me show you how we can set that up. First of all, Hostinger are having an amazing Black Friday sale on right now. They've got great deals like 67% off this KVM2 server, which is now down to just $5.99 per month for 24 months. This is exactly the kind of server that we're gonna need for this project. Hostinger's VPSs use powerful hardware like NVMe SSD storage and AMD EPYC processors. Super important for what we're doing because we need that performance. If you're not exactly sure how much power you'll need and thus which plan to pick, don't worry, you can easily scale to suit your needs. One of my favorite things about Hostinger. And also, this is very important, when you've picked a server and you're checking out, make sure you use the coupon code Cherno. You'll get an additional 10% off this already crazy sale, so make sure you do that. Once you've got the server, you can set it up from your dashboard, and honestly, this couldn't be easier. The first step is choosing a location. They've got this new map here, which shows you the latency to all these different server locations they have, and it automatically picks the best for you. If you're wondering why mine is so high, it's because I'm all the way over here in Melbourne, Australia. That's all right though, since most of you guys, the users, are in the US, so we'll just go with this one here in Phoenix. Next is the operating system, and as you can see, there's lots and lots to choose from. I'm just gonna go with the latest version of Ubuntu. Next, we'll have to create a root password. Hostinger gives us full root access, which of course is crucial for what we're doing since we want full control over our server. And that's really all there is to it. About a minute later, our server will be fully set up and ready for us to use. And we can just log in using SSH as this clearly tells us. So from here, once we SSH in, we can just use Ubuntu as normal and set up everything we need for our Hazel server once the Hazel server is actually ready. But the important thing is we've basically established the endpoint, the end game, right? And so now we can have this server alongside our development to keep testing Hazel server with it and make sure everything's working in an actual real environment instead of some weird simulated thing that we'd have to create if we didn't have this. Huge thank you to Hostinger for sponsoring this video and project. Make sure you head on over to hostinger.com/Cherno and use coupon code Cherno for all of your server needs, especially before this Black Friday sale ends. I'm gonna load this project. So the server application will load the same project file, and then I'm guessing it needs to somehow get like some C# server DLL that is different, because remember I said we're kind of making two different games here, so it's gonna make like, it's gonna get like its own C# DLL or whatever. And then it needs to load, I guess, a scene. So the question now is then how do we set up this exact same player on the server? And I think the solution is probably gonna be that like this player, when we set it up, like maybe we'll have an option, like somehow this entity, and I guess all of its children potentially, I don't know, it's gonna have to have some kind of either a component or even just the core entity itself should have some kind of like, is it local or is it server or like whatever. So even if we do get the server running everything, so we have the server and it runs everything, and then we have the client, which is us over here, right? Then I still think that like the communication between the two though, that's gonna be quite minimal usually. So again, a player will just connect and be like, okay, I am this player and I'm moving here. And then the server will just be like, okay, let me just run that real quick. And then I'm gonna also kind of send that back to you and you can confirm that it's the truth because it better be the truth. I guess we should just have like some sort of like domain or whatever for that. Do we just give it a component? We can just have it be a byte or whatever. That's just like domain. So we'll just do enum class entity domain. I'll just make it a UNAT. It doesn't really matter too much. No. Client, server, both. If we look at like the player, then we have this new thing over here that I added, which is like the domain, right? So at the moment it's just like client, server, or both. And so we can change that. And if we hit Control S, it will obviously save that as part of the scene. So we added all of that, but it actually doesn't do anything though. Like as in, we need this. The reason why this exists is because for one, this will determine, I think, what scripts you'll be able to add. So at the moment, the scripts are just displayed from basically this, which is the client version, the client DLL. But if you change it to server, it will display scripts from this. So I'll make that happen. Now, I think what I need to do is probably make it so that we can actually have a server, right? So if I make an entity called server, I set that domain to be just server only. Let's start like this. Then we could make it so that, okay, when we decide to add a script component to this being server only, so it's not set to both and it's not set to client, means that when we hit play in the client, it shouldn't deal with this entity at all. It's as if it's not there. But also, when we drop down this, at the moment it's showing us all the stuff that's present, I think, inside the client DLL. Whereas what it's supposed to do and what it's about to do once I make it do my will is it will just show all the stuff that's in that server DLL, and that's obviously what determines the scripting behavior for that. From there, we could probably go to loading making the server load this exact scene, but obviously play the scene or instantiate all the entities based on the server mode instead. So server will be kind of different. What I'm going to try and do now is I'm just going to try and see if we have this property script reference. We'll just take in the entity domain and I'll just pass it in here. So we made this a boolean, but I'm going to make this just take in entity domain, I think. Server manager. Let's make a server manager class here. And then I don't know what we'll do here. Let's just do like log.warn server. Yeah, I don't know. I think this might actually be all we need, to be honest. I think if we run this now, I think we'll have the ability to actually log server out from the server manager, which is in the server DLL. And that's because our entity is server only. So hopefully that is just gonna work. Okay, so server, let's add a script component to it and let's set this to, look at that. So it brings up just server manager because you can see that's the only thing that we have over here inside our server. So it's clearly not obviously reading from here. It's got our server manager. Whether or not it will work is another question. So let's click on it. Okay, we got a message. That's all right. Script engine is valid script. Okay, so yeah, that's going to depend on where it's coming from. Probably want to separate this into is valid client script and also is valid server script. Because obviously these are both validation functions, right? It's a bool, it returns a bool and it's called is valid. This doesn't actually do anything. It just tells us what's up. It just tells us, hey, is this good or not, right? So one thing we could do is we could also still have that is valid script function that we just deleted, right? But now it's kind of like we need a bit more information. We could just do entity domain as well, right? So probably just be like if domain is client, then return is valid client script. The domain is server, then server. Otherwise, we can do basically is valid client or server. Play again, that worked, nice. So the critical thing here is that you can see we're printing the word server here, but the reason why that's cool is because the only reason why that's working is because we have the domain listed as server and we're using a class here for our script that only exists in the server. So what we've just demonstrated here is like a separation of client and server for both entities and scripts, which is really important because now this is the thing that can theoretically be the code that we run on the server side, if that makes sense, right? So basically what I'm saying is that at the moment, we're obviously running everything inside Hazelnut, but what we need to then do is to create this entire scene, only instantiate the things that are either server or both, and this is on the server, and then that should mean that we can run this project over here called Hazel Server, right? And then Hazel Server, it will load the project, it will load the scene, it will run the scene, it will play the scene, it will instantiate that entity called server manager or whatever, which will instantiate the script called server manager, and we should see it logging here or wherever we want it to really, that text that we wrote in C#, right? So that's now the big picture. Our goal is just to get this code alone running on the Hazel server. This is server layer. So let's have a look at runtime layer, because what I want to do is you can see that runtime layer takes in a project path and we have server app, obviously, which just does this. It actually does take in a project path, and we are actually giving it to the server application. So I already did that, which is kind of nice. And it's being also put into the server layer already even, which is also awesome. And I think we're even storing it, right? Yeah, we are. So that stuff is all identical. So if we have a look at runtime layer, we're just gonna start yoinking code from there because a lot of it's going to be obviously very similar, but some stuff will be different. Open project, for example, is going to load the actual project. And then if we look at the rest of the code, this is all renderer code. But then at the end, we do on-scene play. So we also want to do that. Yeah, so we'll go through this in a minute and make it better. But if we look at, so on attach, I think is basically done. So let's close this. Let's have a deeper look at this and we'll see what we can remove or whatever. So if we look at on attach, we're just doing these two things. On detach, that's pretty self-explanatory as well. On update is really easy. We basically just do, that's the main thing we're doing. And then open project. So we need to deserialize runtime. So something here definitely needs to obviously be aware that this is the server, because at the moment we're pretending that we're the runtime. And same with this actually. So we have an app binary, but we're not going to have an app binary. We're going to have a server binary instead. And then the server is just it's not going to have anything visual like materials or textures or anything. So they are going to be different, entirely different asset packs basically. The client asset pack should have this, and the server asset pack should have this, which is what hopefully we're going to be able to use in a minute. What I can do now is I can write some arbitrary code here and make it do whatever I want. So for example, let's grab the translation.x, plus equals 5 times time step or whatever. Translation equals translation. And note that obviously I'm doing this in C#, right? So translation X, translation Y. Sorry, this is the lamest, but also the only example I can think of right now. Translation Z, right? So we have that here. It's part of this server entity, right? So I can hit play and I'll see obviously it over here. Then I can, and this is the part that sucks, I can do build all, which is gonna take like half an hour. I really should clean up this project. What we just demonstrated in the editor, I can now do on the server, hopefully. So if I run the server and we look at this, you can see we have that entity translation that we were logging from C# right over here. So we've actually programmed the server basically by using this C# module. The next step obviously is we can just start writing our server as normal, and it has access to like our entire Hazel C# API, but we still have to like tell the client what to do, and the client needs to tell the server what to do in a way, or at least ask it to do certain things, and we still need to do the communication between the two, but that's actually kind of easy. Because that's abstracted away for us using like Valve's networking, game networking sockets library. And we already have that inside the Hazelnet module, right? It's just, we need to expose that to C#, but all that kind of server client API is there already. So now it's just about using it in C#, I guess, to actually make this do something. Let me do one more thing that's a much better example. We're gonna open up Hazelnut, and I'm actually gonna build like a scene that runs a certain way inside Hazel. Okay, let's have it be server first, and then we can see if because the client's gonna display everything anyway. So let's do this. Let's add, we're gonna add a cube, a 3D cube. Let's just like, I don't know, I'll rotate it a little bit. I'm gonna mark it as being server side. And then I'm gonna make a plane. So this already has a box collider on it. Let's just pick a material, it doesn't matter what it is. And then we got this cube over here. I'll just shift it like somewhere here, okay? And then we're gonna add a rigid body that's gonna be dynamic, right? So if I save this scene and I just like hit simulate physics, you can see that obviously it falls, and that's kind of it, right? So interesting, right? What I'll do though now is the server, so this plane, I'm also gonna have it be on the server, right? So now you can see we've got 3 entities that exist on the server. So what I'll do now is the server manager, I want it to be able to read the cube's position. So over here, and I have no idea if this will work, guys, but I hope so. I'm gonna write public entity cube. I'm gonna compile the script, and then over here in server, I should have my cube here, like as in an input for it, basically. I'm gonna basically click and drag this cube over here. So now I have that reference to that cube. And then over here, instead of just logging this entity translation that I was doing that moved the server manager entity itself, which was just this server entity over here, I'm instead going to basically say cube translation and cube rotation. Oh, sorry, this should be cube dot, because we want to use the cube. So if I run this now, I can't simulate it because it won't run the script. If I look at the log, okay, we're just gonna crash, that's fine. That could also be an issue with the fact that we now have 2 assemblies, but it's okay. I think there's something we can do to make this a little bit better. What I'll do, because I think I know why I think might just be an issue reading this if it's script only. So here's what we'll do. We'll try this. We'll try to get rid of cube here. We'll make this entity private instead. And then we'll just do mcube equals find entity by tag cube. So we're just looking for it in the world instead. I don't know if cube is, let's call it server cube, yeah? So now obviously back in the editor, we've lost that field now, and this cube, I'm gonna rename it to server cube. So now if I hit play, it works, and you can see we have the physics obviously working there. And then over here, we've got the cube rotation and translation. You know, it's falling down and then it's hitting the ground and it's kind of staying at 0.5, which is right in the middle because it's a 1x1 cube, right? So the center point is 0.5 y off the ground, right? So we kind of simulating physics, right? And that's working obviously as we expect in the editor, but now the test is going to be, since I've marked all these three entities as server and the script that's printing this is from the server, if I build this, I should hopefully be able to run this entire physics simulation as it appears here on the server. So that's going to be really cool. So let's try run the server and we'll see if we get our awesome physics simulation or if it crashes. Okay, well, I think we did it, guys. Let's just hit pause. So our cube, which has this is the translation, this is the rotation. It started off at negative 2.41, 2.59, and 1.94, right? And then you can see, if you look at the y, which is this column here, you can see the y is getting lower because it's falling, and then eventually it's going to hit the ground, which is at about 0.5 or whatever. And you can see it's settled on 0.5 because it's hit the ground, just like in the editor. So that's pretty damn awesome. We're running this cube simulation with physics and everything now on the server, and we're able to have this server binary. I do want to point out though that this like thing of like server is obviously something that I just made up. Like as in, what's a server? You know what I mean? Like it's just basically it's a stripped runtime, and Hazel's runtime already existed anyway, right? So it's not like, I want to point out that this is very exciting, but it's not like that impressive because all of this stuff already existed. It's just what's impressive to me personally is the fact that we were able to get here so quickly because I'm not running half the engine here. And so here we are, back outside, because the video's over. Let me know what you guys thought of this kind of video, if you liked seeing the real development live streams in here, or if a retrospective story is more enjoyable. All of this code is being pushed right into Hazel's development repository, so if you guys want access to that, patreon.com/Cherno, and you'll also be helping to support the development of Hazel. I'll see you guys next month for the continuation of this project, but until then, don't forget to check out hostingr.com/Cherno and use code Cherno for all of your server needs, especially while the Black Friday sale is on. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.